She had only asked for a table, nothing more. No special treatment, no demands. Just a quiet corner near the window where she could enjoy her evening alone. But the maitre d' gave her a glance that lasted 1 second too long. "No reservation?" he asked, lips tight. "No," she replied calmly. "I was hoping to walk in." The smile he gave was the kind used to dismiss, not to welcome. "We're fully booked?" he said flatly, glancing at her modest dress and worn handbag. "You might want to try somewhere more casual." Around her, patrons in suits and sequins sipped imported wine and flicked glances in her direction. Some laughed. One waiter whispered to another, "Lost tourist? Or just clueless?" She gave a soft smile, nodded, and turned to leave. Not angry, not embarrassed, just done. What they didn't know, she was married to the man whose investment group owned the very building the restaurant sat in. The man known for never drawing attention until it was necessary. And when he arrived minutes later, he would not just ask why his wife had been turned away, he would make a statement they would never forget. Because some lessons cost nothing, and others, they come with a tip worth $1 million. Her name was Alina Shah, a woman of quiet elegance and unshakable calm. She had never needed attention to feel seen. She did not dress for show, she did not speak to impress, and she never entered a room expecting others to know who she was. She didn't need them to. Alina had built her life on humility, even after marrying Ilyas Shah, one of the most powerful men in the hospitality industry. A billionaire with investments in resorts, real estate, and high-end dining, Ilyas was known for his sharp instincts and silent loyalty to the people he loved, especially Alina. That evening, Alina had planned a simple dinner for herself. Ilyas had been delayed by a last-minute board meeting, and she didn't want to wait. So she chose a restaurant they had often walked past but never tried, La Belle Maison, elegant, refined, and known for its exclusivity. She arrived alone, dressed in a simple olive green dress with flat sandals, hair pulled back in a low bun. She walked in with warmth, not expectation, unaware that her lack of flash would become her first offense. From the moment she stepped through the door, the staff dismissed her as not their type. She didn't look like their typical VIP guest. There was no designer clutch, no bold entrance, no name-dropping, and so the maitre d' waved her off with a rehearsed excuse about being fully booked. What they didn't realize? Alina was no stranger to luxury. She simply never needed it to announce her presence. And as she stepped out into the cool evening air, she sent a simple text. Tried the new place. Not as welcoming as the name suggests. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to, because the man she texted was already on his way, and when Ilyas Shah walked into that restaurant, the cost of arrogance would go up more than anyone expected. Inside La Belle Maison, laughter echoed between crystal chandeliers and tables lined with imported silverware. The staff moved like they were on stage. Flawless uniforms, choreographed smiles, every gesture rehearsed for the right kind of clientele. And Alina Shah, she didn't fit the part. After her polite inquiry at the front desk was met with condescension, she had quietly stepped aside and sat on a bench near the entrance, scrolling through her phone. Maybe she'd try somewhere else, she thought. The maitre d', Louis, nudged a server nearby and tilted his head in her direction. "She's still here?" he whispered. "Maybe she's waiting for an Uber," the server replied. "Either way, not our problem." Their chuckles weren't loud, but they were intentional. Another waiter passed by and rolled his eyes. Next time she wants to pose for luxury, she should rent the outfit too. What they didn't know, or care to learn, was that Alina's dress was handmade by a regional designer who didn't advertise online. Her handbag wasn't branded, but it had belonged to her late grandmother, one of the first female professors at a university in Lahore. But none of that mattered here, because in this place, respect had a dress code, and the guests inside, many of whom had never worked a day for the wealth they flaunted, were given more attention than the woman who could quietly purchase the entire block. Alina stood slowly, gave a faint smile to the front staff, who didn't even glance at her, and walked out. No raised voice, no complaint, But just as she stepped into the night, a black luxury sedan rolled up to the valet. Out stepped Ilyas Shah. Tailored black suit, no tie, expression unreadable. The valet's demeanor changed instantly. "Sir, welcome. Do you have a reservation?" "No," Ilyas said coolly, eyes scanning the restaurant windows. "But I'm told you're fully booked." The valet chuckled awkwardly. "We always make room for even for people you turned away minutes ago," he interrupted. "My wife, olive dress, sat on that bench. You told her there were no tables." The valet blinked. Inside, through the glass, Louis the maitre d' caught sight of Ilyas and immediately turned pale. I didn't know," Louis stammered when Ilyas walked through the doors moments later. "Exactly," Ilyas replied, his voice measured. "You didn't know, but you assumed." He looked around the restaurant. It was quiet now. Even the guests who didn't recognize him sensed something had shifted. "You looked at my wife," he continued, "and because she wasn't wearing a name, a label, or an entourage, you decided she didn't deserve a table." He turned to the manager who had just appeared near the wine bar. "Is that your policy? Or your pride?" "No, sir," the manager replied quickly. "That is not how we train our staff, but it's how they behave," Ilyas said, cutting through the defense like glass. He walked slowly through the dining room, scanning the space, and then pulled out a checkbook from his coat. "Here's how this will go," he said. "You'll accept this donation, $1 million. It will be split evenly among your back-of-house staff, the kitchen, the janitorial team, the dishwashers, the ones who serve, not perform." He placed the check on the host stand. "As for the front of house," he turned to Louis, now frozen in place, "they'll be retrained. Or replaced." Silence. "And for the record," Ilyas added, "my wife didn't leave angry. She left disappointed." Then he turned and walked back out the door, where Alina was waiting, just as calm as she had been when she arrived. The moment Ilyas and Alina exited, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted from confident elegance to brittle silence. Inside, no one was laughing now. Guests murmured behind half-lowered wine glasses. Staff huddled near the bar. Even the jazz quartet playing in the corner had paused mid-note, the tension too sharp to ignore. Louis, the maitre d', stood pale and wordless at the host stand, the $1 million check still untouched in front of him, like a mirror reflecting his biggest mistake. In the kitchen, however, it was a different scene. Line cooks stared at the check in disbelief. The head chef, usually stoic under pressure, looked stunned. For them, the message wasn't just about the money. It was about being seen, heard, valued. The back of a house, so often overlooked, had just been gifted a life-altering thank you, because one woman in a simple dress had been treated like she didn't matter, and now she mattered more than anyone in the room. Outside, Alina sat quietly in the car beside Ilyas. She looked at him, her hand resting softly on his. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied. "But they did." She gave a small smile. "I was going to let it go." "I wasn't," he said, "because it was never about the table. It was about how they see people." Across town, phones buzzed. One guest who had witnessed the scene uploaded a vague tweet. "Billionaire just dropped a $1 million tip because waiters disrespected his wife. Grace in silence is the loudest kind." Within hours, it went viral, but Alina would never post about it. And Ilyas didn't need the headlines, because the point had already been made, not just to a restaurant, but to anyone watching. You don't need to scream to make an impact. You just need to know who you are, and never forget it, even when others do. Inside La Belle Maison, retraining started that same week. The manager, who had once boasted about the restaurant's elite standards, now quietly revised their guest service manual. Line cooks received bonuses that covered student loans and medical bills. And front-of-house staff were reminded that respect isn't offered after recognition. It's the foundation for everything. And Louis? He was replaced. Not because of a headline, but because of a moment. A moment when someone underestimated Grace and got taught a $1 million lesson in return. The following week, La Belle Maison felt different. The same chandeliers still sparkled. The same velvet-lined menus still whispered exclusivity. But beneath the polish, something had changed. The staff moved with a quieter awareness. The smirks were gone. The whispers? Silenced. Even the manager now stood by the entrance himself, greeting each guest, whether they wore designer heels or canvas sneakers. In the kitchen, the energy had shifted too. The dishwashers laughed more. The sous chef who had nearly quit last month had just paid off his mother's hospital bills. And every time someone new walked in, the staff remembered one truth. The most powerful person in the room isn't always the loudest. Meanwhile, Alina and Elias had returned to their routine, morning walks, evening tea, and plans for their next community health project. They never spoke about the tip again, because for Alina, the win wasn't in the money. It was in the quiet validation that her worth had never needed recognition. She had walked into that restaurant with nothing but dignity and left with her head held higher than any wine-soaked guest inside. As for Elias, he watched her with the same admiration that had built their story from day one. She didn't flinch when they dismissed her, he said once to a close friend, and that's why she deserved to be remembered. And she was, not because she shouted, but because she stood still while everyone else fell silent. Alina never asked for attention. She did not walk in with designer labels or drop her last name to demand respect. She asked for a table, nothing more. But the world mistook her simplicity for insignificance, and that mistake became a million-dollar reminder that dignity never comes with a price tag. Have you ever been judged by how you looked, or how quietly you walked into a room? Or maybe you watched someone powerful move in complete silence and shift everything? Tell us in the comments, because your story might remind someone else that real presence doesn't shout. It simply stands. If this story moved you, if it made you pause or reflect, subscribe, tap the bell icon, and stay with us. Here, we don't just tell stories. We reveal what power looks like when it chooses not to boast. And remember, you don't have to prove anything to those who already decided to underestimate you, because the ones who judge your worth based on appearances will always miss the moment when you become unforgettable. Until next time.